My name is Sarah, and I'm 35 years old. The Sunday morning that shattered my perception of my marriage began, like countless others, with the gentle chime of church bells echoing across our quiet suburban street in Ohio. I remember the crisp autumn air, the vibrant reds and yellows of the maple trees outside our stained glass windows, a picture of perfect tranquility that was about to be brutally ripped apart. My 5-year-old daughter Lily sat beside me in the pew, her small hand warm in mine, humming softly along to the prelude hymn. She looked angelic in her little navy dress, completely oblivious to the storm brewing just inches away. The sermon was winding down, and the familiar warmth of the community enveloped us, a feeling I had always cherished. Our pastor, Reverend Miller, spoke of forgiveness and grace, his words a comforting balm, yet they felt like a cruel joke in the face of what was coming. Mark, my husband, was on my other side, his jaw tight, a familiar tension in his shoulders that I had learned to dread. For months, our home had been a minefield of unspoken resentments, a silence punctuated by his growing disdain for my career, my choices, my very existence, it seemed. Today, it was poised to detonate. I tried to catch his eye, to offer a silent plea for calm, but he stared straight ahead, a rigid statue of defiance. Then, Reverend Miller paused, asking if anyone wished to share a personal reflection on the day's theme. A nervous ripple went through the congregation. Before I could even register the question fully, Mark stood up. It wasn't his turn, it wasn't planned, and my stomach dropped like a stone. A sudden hush fell over the sanctuary, all eyes now on him. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. I could feel Lily subtly shift beside me, sensing the change in the atmosphere. He cleared his throat, his voice resonating through the solemn space, amplified by the church's acoustics. His eyes, devoid of any warmth, scanned the faces before him, lingering for a fraction of a second on me, a look of pure accusation. "I wish to speak on grace," he began, his tone deceptively calm. "Specifically, the grace we extend to those who squander opportunities, who fail to uphold their responsibilities, even to their own families." A cold wave washed over me. This wasn't a reflection. This was an attack. My hands began to tremble. Mark then continued, his voice a low, biting whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the church. "My wife, Sarah," he declared, and the sound of my name, usually a comfort, now felt like a brand. "She works. Long hours. Sometimes she prioritizes her job over us, over our home, over our daughter." Each word was a deliberate stab, delivered with a calm, almost righteous air. The air in the church became thick, heavy with unspoken judgment. I could feel the stares, hundreds of them, burning into my skin. Lily looked up at me, her big, innocent eyes filled with confusion. I desperately wanted to shrink, to disappear into the polished wooden pew, to melt into nothingness. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, stealing my breath. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was public shaming, a performance for an audience of our friends, our neighbors, our community. And it was all happening here, in the supposed house of God. The stinging silence that followed his words in the pew wasn't new to me. It was a familiar, suffocating cloak woven from years of unspoken resentments and brittle politeness. Mark, my husband, had perfected the art of public criticism, cloaking his barbs in righteous indignation, especially when surrounded by our church community. He believed deeply in appearances, and I, apparently, was a flaw in his meticulously crafted facade. I remember the morning, just hours before, the tension already thick enough to cut as we prepared for service. Lily, our daughter, ever the observant one, had noticed it too. "Daddy, are you going to be late again?" she asked, her small voice cutting through the strained quiet of the kitchen. She was perched on her usual stool, cereal untouched, her eyes wide as she watched Mark fuss with his tie. He paused, his reflection in the hallway mirror glaring back. "Lily, we've discussed this. Your father has important matters. Punctuality is a virtue, isn't it?" he replied, his tone clipped. "But Mama always says you leave her to rush and then blame her for it later," Lily countered, her brow furrowing slightly, looking at me. My heart ached, hearing her echo my silent frustrations. Mark's eyes met mine, a cold glint in them. See, Sarah? Even our daughter understands timeliness. If you'd been ready earlier, as I requested last night, we wouldn't be in this predicament. You always make things so difficult. His voice was low, each word a stone. Mark, I woke up with a headache. I've been trying my best, I said, my voice trembling. Trying your best? That's hardly good enough when we have church leadership joining us for lunch, he scoffed, pulling his jacket on. Lily, go get your Sunday school bag. And Sarah, please put on some lipstick. You look tired. Lily slid off her stool, her small hand finding mine. Mama, don't listen to him. You look pretty, she whispered, her loyalty a fierce shield. I squeezed her hand, a silent thank you. Thank you, sweetie, I murmured, forcing a weak smile. The car keys jingled impatiently in Mark's hand, a harsh sound. Are we going, or are we going to stand here all day dissecting your personal grievances? He snapped, already walking towards the front door. Every Sunday felt like this, a performance for the outside world, orchestrated by him, with me constantly feeling like the understudy who couldn't quite remember her lines. I clutched Lily's hand tighter, the weight of the day settling heavily on my shoulders. His voice, usually measured and resonant from the pulpit, took on a cutting edge, his gaze locking onto mine as he turned from the communion table. A ripple of nervous coughs spread through the pews. I felt every eye on me, a suffocating blanket of judgment. My stomach churned. He began, Some amongst us forget sacred vows made before God and this congregation. They choose self-indulgence, placing burdens on those who strive for righteousness. It is a betrayal of trust, a desecration of the very foundation upon which our community is built. Such acts erode faith, not just in individuals, but in the divine order itself. My breath hitched. He paused, letting the implication hang like incense smoke. Isn't that right, Sarah? My daughter, Lily, sat beside me, her small hand instinctively finding mine, fingers interlacing with a grip surprisingly strong. I squeezed back, a silent apology. Her eyes, wide and luminous, were fixed on her father, absorbing every nuance. Usually bubbly, now a profound stillness had settled over her, an unnatural quiet that amplified the tension. I felt her rapid heartbeat against my palm. I finally managed, Mark, what are you doing? This is a church service, not a public shaming. My whispered protest was more desperate than defiant. I could hear whispers from the back pews. Oh dear. And he's really going there. He smiled then, a tight, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. What am I doing, dear? I am simply speaking truth, as is my duty. We are all here to support each other, to confess our shortcomings. And some shortcomings are more public than others, aren't they? Especially when they impact the very fabric of our family and our spiritual leadership. His voice dripped with condescension. A few mumbled amens followed, a wave of discomfort. Lily's grip tightened almost painfully. She looked up at me, her lower lip trembling slightly. Mommy, she whispered, barely a breath. Why is Daddy saying those things? Is he mad at you again? Can we go home? Her innocent questions were a quiet knife, twisting the silence even further. The humiliation was palpable, pressing down on us. The air in the church felt thick, every eye on me, needles pricking my skin, burning with David's words still echoing. My cheeks flamed, hands trembling, a familiar betrayal when emotion overwhelmed me. I longed to disappear. David beside me seemed oblivious, posture rigid, eyes fixed on the altar. His silence was louder than his outburst, a chilling indifference. Mommy? Lily's small, fragile voice broke through my humiliation. Are you okay? You look so sad. Her tiny fingers laced around my trembling ones, a lifeline. I squeezed her hand back, unable to speak, a lump in my throat. Then, clear and steady, Lily's voice cut through the tension. Daddy? She addressed David, her gaze fixed on him. Why did you say those things to Mommy? It sounded like you were being mean. Is Mommy not good enough for you? Her innocent yet piercing words hung in the air. David's rigid posture shifted. He finally turned his head, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Lily, this isn't the time for such questions," he muttered, voice low. But Lily didn't back down. "But it is the time. Mommy looks like she's going to cry because of what you said. You always make her feel small in front of everyone. Why do you do that, Daddy? Why?" She paused, her small voice gaining an edge. "Do you even love Mommy anymore? Because what you said wasn't love." The ride home from church was a tomb. A silence so thick it pressed against my eardrums, each second a heavy, ticking weight in the oppressive quiet of the car. I stared out the window, watching the familiar suburban houses blur into a watercolor wash of brick and siding, unable to focus on anything but the tremor in my hands. Mark hadn't said a word since we left the parking lot, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the road ahead as if concentrating on the very act of not exploding. I half expected him to, honestly. His anger often simmered, then erupted without warning, leaving a trail of emotional devastation in its wake. But this silence felt colder, more calculated, almost like a punishment in itself. Finally, he pulled into the driveway, the crunch of tires on gravel loud in the stillness. He killed the engine, and the quiet deepened further. I waited, holding my breath, my heart a frantic hummingbird in my chest. He turned to me then, his gaze flat, devoid of the usual fire. "Are you going to apologize for making a scene?" he asked, his voice low, deceptively calm. My breath hitched. Apologize? For reacting to his public humiliation? The audacity of it stole the air from my lungs. "A scene?" I managed, my voice a thin reed. "You think I made a scene? You screamed at me, Mark, in front of our daughter, in front of our friends, in front of the entire congregation." He leaned back, a sigh escaping him that sounded more like a weary dismissal than actual remorse. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Emily. It was a private conversation that got a little loud." "You're always so sensitive. Honestly, sometimes I wonder why I even bother trying to talk to you about anything. You just twist my words." His dismissiveness, that familiar weapon, cut deeper than any shout. It wasn't just the words, it was the way his eyes glazed over, the subtle shrug of his shoulders, the clear message that my feelings were irrelevant, an inconvenience. Twist your words? Mark, you accused me of being irresponsible with money. Again, right after I told you about Sarah's scholarship application. You undermined me. You always do. My voice, despite my efforts, trembled. He reached for the door handle, already disconnecting, already moving past it. "Look, I'm tired. Can we just drop it? We'll talk later when you've calmed down." He didn't wait for a response, just exited the car, leaving me there, trapped in the oppressive silence and the echo of his casual cruelty. It wasn't the first time he'd done this, dismissed my pain, gaslighted my reality. Each instance chipped away at something vital inside me, leaving me feeling smaller, more invisible. I watched his retreating back, a familiar wave of despair washing over me, the kind that makes your limbs heavy and your vision blur. How many more times could I endure this? How many more times could I pretend that his cutting remarks were just talk? This wasn't a temporary calm. It was the eye of a hurricane, gathering strength for the next storm. The silence after Lily's words was a living thing, thick and suffocating. David, my husband, had gone utterly still, the color draining from his face to leave him a ghastly white. His mouth, moments before contorted in a sneer at me, now hung slightly agape, a silent echo of his shock. My heart, which had been pounding, found a strange, quiet calm, not peaceful, but the eerie stillness before a true storm. I looked from David to Lily, her small hand still clutching mine, her eyes wide and unwavering. She wasn't defiant, just devastatingly true. "Lily, what are you talking about?" David managed, his voice a strained whisper, barely audible above the rustle of hymnals. People were shifting, casting furtive glances. The sanctity of the service was shattered. "Your mother and I, we are fine. We always have been." His attempt at normalcy was pathetic, a desperate plea to rewrite reality. Lily tightened her grip on my hand. Her voice was steady, though small. "No, Daddy. You make Mommy sad. I hear you, in the kitchen, always yelling." Simple, direct, a hammer blow. These weren't accusations. They were raw observations, unfiltered by adult pretense. She was stating what she saw, what she felt. My vision blurred as tears pricked my eyes, not of sadness, but an overwhelming rush of relief and fierce protective love for this tiny human who truly saw me. David's head snapped towards me, his gaze laced with fury and mortification. "You've been telling her things, haven't you, Sarah? Poisoning her against me." His voice, though low, vibrated with dangerous intensity. He was trying to shift blame, to deflect the piercing accuracy of Lily's words. It was typical David, always the victim, always projecting his insecurities. My grip on Lily's hand tightened, a silent promise to shield her. "David, I have never poisoned our daughter," I retorted, my voice surprisingly strong, a new resolve hardening my tone. The public setting, the eyes on us, no longer mattered as much as protecting Lily, and perhaps myself. Lily sees what she sees. She hears what she hears. And what she sees and hears is a husband who demeans his wife, even in front of our child, even in the house of God. My words were a slow, deliberate burn, each one igniting in the charged air of the pew. His face contorted, a mix of fury and genuine fear, the fear of being exposed, of his facade crumbling. "This isn't the time or place, Sarah," he hissed, glancing nervously at the elderly couple in front, now intensely studying the ceiling. "We will discuss this later. At home." The threat was clear, a promise of retribution. But something had shifted. The power dynamic for a fleeting moment felt different. "Mommy, can we go home now?" Lily asked, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of unspoken pain. It was a simple question, an escape route, a plea for peace. The church, once a sanctuary, was now tainted by his behavior. Staying was no longer an option, not with his veiled threats, not with Lily's fragile peace at stake. The fight had moved beyond these pews. The car ride home was a suffocating void. My hands clenched numbly in my lap, mirroring the hollowness in my chest. Emily sat stiffly in the back seat, a silent, fragile witness to my public humiliation. Mark, meanwhile, was infuriatingly composed, his gaze fixed on the road, as if his cruel words at church had never been uttered. When the garage door finally rumbled shut, sealing us in, the quiet amplified. I longed to scream, to shatter the oppressive stillness, but my throat felt raw. Mark unbuckled his seatbelt with a sharp click. "Are you just going to sit there all day, Sarah?" His flat, emotionless voice was a casual demand, a fresh cut. "We have dinner to prepare." "Dinner?" My voice was a brittle whisper. "You think I can just go back to normal? After that? After you publicly shamed me?" Hot, unwelcome tears blurred my vision. I looked at him, desperate for a shred of remorse, but his face was a wall of cold indifference, a familiar barrier I'd crashed against. He scoffed, a sound of pure disdain. "Shamed you? Sarah, I merely pointed out we need to be more careful with our finances. It's a fact, not a personal attack. Why must you always be so dramatic?" He pushed his door open, ready to escape the confrontation he'd initiated. His lack of empathy was a brutal blade, twisting in the wound. "It's not dramatic, Mark," I cried, words tearing from my chest. "It's a pattern, chipping away at me, making me feel worthless, in front of everyone, in front of our daughter." My voice broke on Emily's name. I looked in the rearview mirror. Emily's small face, etched with profound pain, stared back, her wide eyes fixed on us. My heart fractured. I buried my face in my hands, a choked sob escaping. Then, a small, clear voice, brittle as ice, sliced through the suffocating air. His face, normally so flushed with self-importance, drained of all color in an instant, a ghastly canvas in the soft light of the stained glass windows. His jaw, previously jutting out in a display of condescending triumph, now hung slightly agape, before snapping shut with a click I could almost hear across the silent pews. It was as if my daughter's simple, cutting words had physically siphoned the blood from his veins, leaving him looking like a poorly preserved statue. The hush that descended upon the congregation was palpable, a heavy blanket of collective shock and discomfort, amplifying every tremor in the air. My gaze flickered between him and her, my heart thrumming a frantic, erratic beat against my ribs. A strange, unfamiliar warmth began to spread through me, a slow-burning ember of something akin to pride, fiercely battling the icy grip of humiliation that had held me captive moments before. Are you okay, honey?" I whispered, my voice barely a breath, still disbelieving of her raw courage. She didn't look at me, her eyes locked on her father, a defiant glint in their depths. "I'm fine, Mom," she replied, her voice steady, surprisingly devoid of any childish waver. "But are you?" Her question hung in the air, a silent indictment against the man who stood before us, now visibly trembling. The sudden shift in power was almost dizzying. It was no longer about his public shaming of me. It was about the uncomfortable truth she had laid bare for everyone to see, a truth he was now forced to confront under the glaring scrutiny of dozens of eyes. A ripple went through the pews. Whispers started, soft at first, then growing louder, like the rustling of dry leaves. I heard fragments. "Did you hear that? Poor woman. He really went too far." And then, a clear, authoritative voice from the back, "Pastor, perhaps we should conclude this service." It was Mrs. Henderson, a pillar of the community, her disapproval evident in her tone. My husband flinched, as if physically struck by her words. He finally tore his eyes from our daughter and glared at me, a furious, wounded animal trapped in the spotlight. "You put her up to this, didn't you, Sarah?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous, a stark contrast to the booming confidence he had projected just moments before. His accusation was so absurd, so desperate, that it almost made me laugh. My own daughter, my quiet, introverted girl, had just found a voice I never knew she possessed. "No, I did not," I stated, my own voice gaining strength, each word a stone hitting solid ground. "She speaks for herself, as she always should." My gaze met his, and for the first time in years, I saw not just anger, but a raw, unadulterated fear reflected in his eyes. He was losing control, not just of the narrative he was trying to spin, but of his carefully constructed facade. The church, our sanctuary, had become a public stage for his unraveling. My daughter tugged gently at my hand, her small fingers wrapping around mine. "Mom, can we just go home?" she murmured, her voice now softer, laced with a plea. The energy in the room was suffocating, thick with unspoken judgment and lingering tension. The desire to flee, to escape the suffocating weight of this moment, was overwhelming. My husband stood frozen, his eyes darting frantically around the room, as if seeking an escape route or an ally where none existed. "Yes, sweetheart, we can," I replied, my voice steady, though my knees felt weak. A strange sense of liberation began to bubble within me, a fragile, tender hope that had been dormant for so long. This was not the end of my humiliation, but perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of my freedom. The eyes of the congregation followed us as I slowly, deliberately turned and began to walk towards the aisle, my daughter's small hand a lifeline in mine. A profound hush had fallen over the sanctuary, heavier and more potent than any sermon I'd ever heard. Daniel, frozen in place, looked like a statue carved from ash, every trace of his usual swagger evaporated, replaced by a ghastly pallor. His mouth hung slightly ajar, as if he wanted to speak, to lash out, but no sound could escape the prison of his own shock. He was trapped in the glare of his exposed cruelty, caught by the unvarnished truth uttered by our child. My daughter, standing tall beside me, her small hand still firmly in mine, was the living embodiment of courage, a fierce little defender I hadn't fully recognized until this very moment. Her gaze was steady, unwavering, fixed not on her father, but on the quiet faces around us, as if silently daring anyone to challenge her truth. A single tear tracked down my cheek, not of sorrow, but of an overwhelming, complex mix of shame, relief, and a burgeoning pride. This was a turning point, a visible fracture in the facade we had maintained for far too long. A gentle squeeze on my hand brought my gaze down to hers. Her eyes, usually so playful, held a wisdom far beyond her years, reflecting the filtered light from the stained glass windows in their depths. Mom, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Are you okay? We don't have to stay here. The simplicity of her question, after the earthquake she had just caused, was disarming, pulling me back from the precipice of internal chaos. It was a lifeline, a quiet invitation to choose. I am, sweetheart, I replied, my voice a shaky whisper, but filled with a new resolve. More than okay, maybe. My eyes met hers, and in that shared glance, an unspoken pact formed. We were a team now, out in the open, and the revelation had forged a bond stronger than any chains. Across the aisle, Mrs. Henderson, a woman who usually kept to herself, offered a small, understanding nod, a gesture of quiet solidarity that spoke volumes without a single word. The silence that enveloped us then wasn't empty. It was pregnant with possibility, an invitation to breathe, to simply exist in the aftermath. It felt like the world had paused, waiting for my next move, waiting for our next move. Daniel shifted, his eyes finally meeting mine. But there was no anger there, only a hollow defeat, a stark recognition of the precipice he had pushed us to, and the unexpected strength that had pushed back. The world, which had felt so small and suffocating moments before, suddenly expanded, filled with an unsettling yet exhilarating freedom. This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about the path forward, a path I now knew I couldn't walk alone, or in silence. His humiliation was a side effect, not the goal. My daughter had given me my voice back, and I intended to use it. Mom. Sarah's voice, soft as a butterfly's wing, pulled me from the dark spiral of my thoughts. We were sitting in the small rental, the silence of the night feeling vast, almost holy, after years of a house always filled with tension. Are you okay? Really okay? I turned to her, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the street lamp outside the window. I am, sweetheart, I replied, my voice a little husky. More okay than I've been in a long time. A fragile smile touched my lips, one that felt more real than any I'd worn in years. The air in this unfamiliar room, though still heavy with the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings, also held an odd lightness, as if a great weight had been lifted from my chest. He called again, she whispered, her gaze fixed on the wall, not meeting mine. He wants to talk. He said he misses us. The words hung in the air, a phantom echo of a life we'd just severed. My stomach clenched, a familiar knot of anxiety twisting, but it was weaker this time, less commanding. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs, and consciously pushed the memory of his voice, his pleas, away. What did you tell him, honey? I asked, my voice calm, steady. I wanted her to know that no matter what, I was her anchor now. She finally looked at me, her eyes, so much like mine, filled with an ancient wisdom beyond her years. I told him we needed space, and that he needed to think about what he did, not just what he lost. Her words were a balm, a powerful affirmation that she understood, that she was processing this in her own strong way. That was very brave of you, Sarah, I praised, reaching out to squeeze her hand. Her fingers were small but firm in mine. It's hard, isn't it, to say goodbye to what was, even when it wasn't good. It is, she admitted, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. But I think it's harder to pretend, to live in a story that isn't true. Her honesty was a mirror, reflecting my own deepest fears and the courage I'd found to overcome them. The quiet ticking of the cheap wall clock on the opposite wall filled the space between us, a steady rhythm marking the passage of time, of healing. I nodded, unable to articulate the depth of my agreement. The truth she spoke was a powerful, silent force. The memory of his pale, stunned face at church flashed before my eyes again. A still image burned into my mind. It was a picture of a man who, for the first time, had truly seen the consequence of his actions, not just their immediate impact. That moment, though painful, was also a strangely profound gift, a catalyst for an awakening. We will be okay, Sarah, I affirmed, pulling her into a gentle hug. Her small body felt so fragile, yet so resilient against mine. More than okay. We are free to be ourselves now. Truly. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of a late-night train, these were the new sounds of our freedom, simple and profound. We just sat there, in that quiet embrace, the soft glow from the window casting long, peaceful shadows on the wall, and the world outside seemed to hold its breath with us. That silence, the one that fell after my daughter's words echoed through the hallowed space, wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with the weight of shattered expectations, unspoken truths, and a nascent, fierce pride that swelled within me. My husband, who had always commanded the room, found himself utterly disarmed, his usual bluster dissolving into a pale, defeated stare. He didn't try to retaliate, didn't utter another word. He just stood there, a man unraveled by the simple, profound honesty of a child. We left the church shortly after, not with a dramatic exit, but with a quiet dignity. My daughter's hand, small yet firm, remained clasped in mine. It was a silent pact, a new foundation laid. The drive home was uncharacteristically quiet, yet the quietness wasn't strained. It was a peaceful quiet, a space for us to breathe and process the seismic shift that had just occurred. My husband sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, his shoulders slumped. He hadn't turned to look at me, nor at our daughter, not once. The following days unfolded like a dream emerging from a long, troubled sleep. There were no grand apologies from him, no sudden transformations. But something fundamental had shifted. The subtle dominance, the underlying current of dismissiveness that had dictated our lives, began to dissipate. He walked lighter, spoke softer, and for the first time in years, I felt an unfamiliar sense of equilibrium settling into our home. My daughter, meanwhile, blossomed. She carried herself with a new confidence, her voice clearer, her laughter more frequent. I found myself lingering by the window more often, watching the world outside, no longer feeling trapped within the confines of my own making. The morning light, once something I barely noticed, now seemed to paint the kitchen in brighter hues. The scent of coffee, the hum of the refrigerator, all the mundane sounds of life felt infused with a new, delicate joy. My fear, once a constant companion, began to recede, like a tide pulling back from the shore, leaving behind a clean, open expanse. This newfound space wasn't just physical, it was deeply internal. It was the quiet joy of rediscovering my own voice, hearing its echo in the silence after years of suppressing it. It was understanding that sometimes the most profound revelations don't come from a dramatic confrontation, but from the pure, unadulterated truth spoken by the most unexpected and most beloved of voices. And that truth, once uttered, can redraw the boundaries of an entire life, softly, irrevocably.